So guess what? If there are aliens, God loves them too.
So I don't think that a child is born evil. When you hold your baby in your hand when they're born, that you look at them and go, how odd that something so beautiful can be so evil.
As I wrestle with my own humanity, I think what comes out on the other side is really, really beautiful.
See, I actually believe in the Bible. I just think we have a hard time believing everything that's in there. Then I come to know Jesus and they tell me, no, before you came to know Jesus, you couldn't have had one good thought or intention in your life. Well, out of your mind.
Hey, it's Rich, and you're listening to the Mature Me podcast, weekly content devoted to all things life, leadership, culture, and faith. Thank you for taking some time to tune in. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on all our social channels so you don't miss a thing. Let's listen to today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Mature Me podcast. My name is Rich Wilkerson Jr., and I'm so glad that you are joining us today, wherever you find yourself in the world. Maybe you're listening by way of Spotify or YouTube. However you can, go ahead, like, subscribe, share, leave us a comment, and we so appreciate the feedback around here. Also, if you're a leader out there, which I believe that you are, every Tuesday morning we put out a free resource. It's called Leadership with Rich. Go to richwilkersonjr.com right there. Be a part of that free subscription. I really think, man, as you get better as a leader, as you grow, the people around you are going to get better. And I think that is an awesome, awesome pursuit. This is the podcast that we talk all things maturing, all things growing and becoming. And today I am so privileged to have, honestly, like one of my heroes, and not just a hero from like the last 6 months or the last year, but I go back 20 plus years of listening to this man communicate and teach. And I would say the last 12 to 13 years, getting to know him off the platform has been a great privilege for my life because, man, is he fantastic as a communicator, but he lives an even more inspiring life. He's probably no stranger to you. He leads an amazing podcast with his son, Aaron. It's called Mind Shift. He's authored so many books, an old school book that changed my life, Barbarian Way, but so many other books. He has a brand new book out right now called 7 Frequencies of Communication. He is married to one woman, and he is the father of 2 amazing children who are both good friends of mine. And he is the leader, the futurist, the cultural architect, and the title that he doesn't usually go by, Pastor Erwin McManus of Mosaic. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good.
That was my best intros, I think. I think we should just cut that up. And
that was quite an intro.
That was my Steve Harvey intro right there.
There you go.
You ever see Steve Harvey introduce Jesus?
I think I did see that.
It's actually like one of the most, I feel like that's like something you could do. Like, let me intro Jesus tonight. I'm so grateful that you're here. And it's really, really cool that you're in Miami.
This is the most incredible space.
Oh, I'm so happy you like it.
Yeah.
I think you and I were just chatting that maybe you saw it as we were trying to get it.
Yeah, I remember you brought me over here and said this is a potential place for us. And one of the things I just constantly remember is that everything that exists in many ways is an externalization of someone's imagination. So when I walk through this building, I feel like I'm getting to walk through your imagination, the dreams you have, the vision that you have. And so it's kind of cool because I'm looking inside of your imagination, and you're incredibly imaginative, very creative. And I know that you have a team, an entourage of people that create it. But I just love the fact that an imagination isn't limited to the boundaries of your imagination. When other people join you, the boundaries expand, and you have a team of people that all dream with you and create with you. And it's amazing what you guys are doing in Miami.
You're so kind. Hearing that from anyone is nice, but hearing it from you is even extra special because you probably have the biggest and best imagination maybe I've ever been around. You're in your 60s now, but you're moving like you're 22. You're always moving fast. You're always, I think, thinking globally. At the same time, acting, locally and being right there. I think you're present when you're with people. You were just in New York yesterday. Is Mosaic coming to New York? Is this fully out, or is this is sort of like in the seed format? What's happening?
That's funny. My wife, we were talking on Saturday night, and she said, "So, are we starting a Mosaic in New York?" And I said, "Honey, I think we have started a Mosaic in New York, and that's the reality." This is our 4th time there. We did 3 events on Wednesday nights in different locations in the city, and yesterday was our first Sunday morning experience. And it was wonderful. It's right in that Soho, Tribeca area. We rented a space that I had actually used almost a decade ago for a book signing with my book, The Way of the Warrior. and we were just jam-packed, standing room only. It was just so much fun. So yes, Mosaic New York now exists, and we're just getting it started. And I just cannot wait to see how the future unfolds.
Do you think you're ever going to do like Mosaic Omaha or Mosaic?
People have.
They have. Okay.
Oh, yeah, they have. And one of the things I've tried to explain to people, because people have done Mosaic like Omaha or Tulsa or the places, and it doesn't usually go well. Cincinnati, Cleveland. And I said, Mosaic is a very peculiar expression of community and faith that isn't really for everyone in every place. And we like to act like what we create as humans is for everyone. But, everyone doesn't like chocolate ice cream or pistachio or cookies and cream. People have different flavors. It doesn't mean one's better than the other. And Mosaic is really a community designed to reach like pioneers, entrepreneurs, innovators, creators, artists. And so that culture is a little different than people who maybe are a little more built around like security and predictability and tradition or orthodoxy. And so if you go to I had this pastor, I think it was in Wyoming or someplace like that. There was 900 people or something like this town. And he asked me, I'm trying to do what Mosaic does, but I can't get my church to move very fast. And I said, you live in Wyoming, where people move there to move slow.
Right.
Why would you think that a culture that moves fast like Mosaic would fit effectively in your little town? In fact, not only that, you're not fast. I said, the reason you move there is because slow matches you.
Yes.
So why don't you create something that actually serves the people who live there rather than some idea that has come from the outside in? And I think that's what's really important. We look for places where who we are and how we express our faith is actually needed. And there are places in the world like Tokyo and Paris and London and New York where it's just more obvious that something like Mosaic really is needed, because the message of Jesus always has a human container, and we call it the church. And every decision a church makes to express its culture is a decision who they reach most effectively.
Wow.
The music you choose, the way people dress, the language you use to communicate, all of that is actually a part of the texture of how the gospel is communicated to people. And so, frankly, I have friends who who've come to Mosaic in Hollywood, and some of them from the Black community, and they've said, one of the challenging things for us is we came from a church that was more Black gospel, and we really connect to that music, but we connect to the way you communicate, but we've had to adjust to a different approach toward music. And then other people who've come from more Anglican backgrounds and Episcopalian backgrounds, they're like, this feels very extroverted. For them, they're used to very introverted experiences with God. One's not right, one's not wrong, one's not less spiritual or more spiritual. I think a lot of times the differences in churches are not theological, they're just personality.
Yep.
I'm more introverted, but I love those large experiences where people are passionate and celebrating and enjoying life. And when I come to VU, I go, oh wow, this is like the most extraordinary experience. It's why people go to watch a live basketball game. You can watch it on TV, but when you're in that arena with all those fans and they're celebrating that team and cheering on, you're down to the last 2 minutes of the game and it's on the line, the energy with other people who are on the same page with you, and that's just sports. Now you take it into the arena of worship and experiencing the presence of God, and you're packed in a room of people who have a deep faith and are filled with hope and have a passion for life. It's no wonder that people who even don't believe in God come in and experience something they can't explain.
It's really good. I feel like we're still at the start of a new year here, as we're in the first 3-month window here. And it's always interesting, like you start a brand new year, and I feel like people always automatically think, to improve my life, I have to add to my life. So it's like, I need new goals, and I'm going to read 10 books. Well, you haven't read any of the books on your shelf, all the stuff that we do, but it's like addition. I think one of the things that I've learned in life is that sometimes God grows you by subtraction. And I think it's kind of a powerful principle that sometimes in discovering who you are, you have to define who you're not. And just the idea of like Mosaic, it's not that we're against Des Moines or Omaha. I don't know why I pick on those two cities. I love both those places. But God really has given you and your voice a grace in some of these places that are I think, quite difficult. I think it's a different strategy. Mm-hmm. It's a different contextualization, if you will, of the gospel in these places. Mm-hmm. Maybe just for a moment, talk about just how much of like going, oh, I know I'm not that. That's helped you in knowing maybe who you are and what you bring.
Yeah. First of all, you're talking about reducing rather than adding.
Yeah.
There was a year, a few years ago, where we literally at Mosaic created a year of simplicity. We said we're stripping everything that is not essential.
Wow.
And it was a shocking year because a lot of times, even in the most intentional and best intended places, you just keep adding and adding and adding more good stuff. And when you add good stuff, it's hard to get rid of good stuff. Because usually, especially when you're, a church is vibrant like yours, you're not doing any bad stuff. You're doing great stuff. And then you add more great stuff. Then you add more great stuff. And then before you know it, you have so much good that it's almost like too much good. And, and I think it can be the same way in terms of when you're trying to create for everyone. When I write a lot of books, and whenever people come up to me and ask me about writing books, and they'll tell me about their first book, and I said, who are you writing to? They always give the same answer. This book is for everyone. And I always tell them, if the book is for everyone, it's for no one.
Wow.
It has to be for someone for it to have the possibility of being for everyone. And when you ask me, how do I learn how to say no and who to identify myself as, who to be as a human being, when I write a book to someone I love. And I have that person's pain or their journey or their struggle or their challenge or their potential in my mind. And usually it's one or two people. I usually pick one person who has a deep belief in Jesus and one person who doesn't believe in God at all. And I write that book to them. And what I find is the more I can write that book in a very intimate way, the more it reaches more people I ever expected. And, when I started Mosaic, I think part of the limitations, I had to know myself. I wish everyone connected to the way I communicated, but they don't. I wish everyone resonated with the way I see the world and the way I express truth and vision, but it just isn't real. The reality is the world is, in a sense, is like a bell curve. Yeah. And most people are in this early majority, late majority. Probably about 75% of people fit into this middle. So if you're going to reach the majority of people, you have to have a very clear mainstream approach towards speaking. And that's why the most popular and effective communicators know how to speak to the mainstream. I'm not very good at that. I'm really good at communicating to people who are innovators and entrepreneurs. They kind of get me. Yeah. And I get them. I'm not very good at reaching late adopters, or people that are known as nostalgics, or people who are more rooted in the past. They feel my message is dangerous and I'm dangerous. And so you have to understand who God has created you to be and how you're designed. And you have to then almost like project outward and go, I know that God's created me to be really effective at reaching certain people. And ironically, I think I have more influence on leaders like you than I do on the people who follow you. Mm-hmm. And because leaders are usually attuned to a higher frequency of messaging. And, they're in a sense professional learners. And that's really more my world. Yeah. And, I cannot tell you how many times my wife, Kim, would say to me, I just be more concrete. Just be more concrete. Just be more concrete. And I remember one time I decided I'm going to make my wife happy. I did a series called Concrete. and I finished the first talk and I walked off the stage. Church. And I said, how'd I do? And she said, the only thing concrete about that talk was the title. And so I realized I'm more organic, more abstract, more intuitive, and that's who I'm going to draw. Yeah. That's why LA is a great place for me. That's why places like New York or London or Paris or Tokyo have more connection. Yep. And one of the wonderful things about the world we're in is that because of social media, because of the internet, because of technology, your message can go across the world and find people who desperately need to hear the message of Jesus in a frequency that actually matches who they are as human beings. And I everywhere I go, people know you and love you and really resonate with you, and you have a voice that I think that God has crafted through you that really resonates with so many people. It's not an accident that every building that you guys have is filled with people. It's not an accident that you have standing room only experiences. The way that God has crafted you and DC, it's almost like he just built you for Miami. And he built you to have a voice that actually matches what people's souls are longing for. And I think that's a part of it in life. I'm a lot older than you, so when I was young and I became a person of faith, it was Billy Graham.
Yep.
Like everybody wanted to be Billy Graham. But Billy Graham had a way to speak to the masses. And you have to realize that that's one particular, almost like human frequency. I remember I went to hear Billy Graham in New Orleans. I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but like 80,000 people were there. I fell asleep during his talk. When I woke up? When 5,000 people went walking by me to respond to Jesus.
My goodness.
I was so mad. I waited all my life to hear Billy Graham. But what I realized is, as incredible as he was, it didn't speak to me. But it spoke to the tens of thousands that were responding. And I think that's the difference, is realizing God makes people differently to reach different kinds of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have a brand new project out right now called 7 Frequencies of Communication that I want to talk about. And I want to talk a little bit about communication. And I'm going to share some maybe funny moments throughout our years of you coaching me, and I need a lot of coaching. But I was thinking about, watching your life. And once again, anything that you disagree with, as you do, correct me. But from observation from afar, and at times getting closer to you, like you are whatever this word means to be a creative. And for me, a creative is someone who's solving problems, but has ideas and imagination and then puts action to it. I think your speed is fast. You're moving. When I think back, just me watching Erwin and Mosaic, there's been all these like evolutions in different phases and forms and shapes and sizes of what it was. When I first was kind of watching you used to travel around like 5 different locations and rock up and preach all day. I've also seen you go into simplicity and scale back. You've always paid attention to aesthetic. You've always cared about design. You've always cared about how we're delivering this message. And I think a creative is somebody like, as soon as it becomes a routine, the creative's like, oh, we're disrupting it. Like, so there's a part of you that maybe like it needs to stay inconsistent, but you're moving quick. In all of this changing, my first time I heard you, I believe it was 2004 at a Catalyst conference in Atlanta. So this is 21 years ago.
Wow.
And I've told the story before, but quite frankly, there's a message. Your closing of the altar call is you in a driving rainstorm in your minivan, and there was a homeless man that you just couldn't pass. And you had to get out in the rainstorm. And somehow when you got back in, Kim was like, that's the best message you ever, not a dry eye in the place. I bought all the books. I saw your banner there. I'm like, this is the greatest preach I've ever heard in my life. That's 21 years ago. What 21 years later is exactly the same? And what is like, oh, Rich, this is so different from, I'm so different today than that guy. And even as do you remember that moment? Or is that like, does that feel like something in the distant past? You're like, oh, I've moved on way past that. Like,
I think that probably the thing would be most different perhaps is that at that time in my life, I was really focusing on trying to change the mind of Christians about what Christianity is supposed to be.
Okay.
It's supposed to look like, what the church is supposed to be. And I felt like I was a salmon swimming upstream.
Okay.
And I think that I made a shift in my life along the way going, I could spend my whole life being frustrated where I think the church should go, or I can just go and reach people that may never hear about Jesus, that the church may not ever reach. And so I think that what shifted for me is who I was talking to. And at that time, I was really talking a lot to the church. And I love the church. And I think that I helped raise up a generation of people who really cared about reaching people. But even moving to LA, and when I was in my early 30s, I made a decision to almost be irrelevant to Christianity, to be almost an unknown inside of Christianity, so that I could effectively reach people who didn't trust religion and didn't trust the church and didn't trust anyone associated with that. And so even going to LA and starting the Mosaic in a nightclub that Prince owned. And I think a lot of people thought I was against the church when I did that, and I wasn't. I was just trying to be the research and development arm of the church and take the risks that I was certain the church would have to take one day. And at that time, no one integrated creativity and spirituality. Like when I would say things like creativity is the natural result of spirituality, people called me a heretic. When I would talk about that humans have been designed to create the future through the choices they make, that made me a heretic. There's so many things I said 20, 30 years ago that made me feel dangerous to the church. But the truth was I was trying to pull the church into relevance. And I realized maybe the best way of doing that was by creating the new and letting people almost like learn through our risk and then adopt that. And that's one of the things that, it's been really satisfying in my life. I'm 66 now. So I've had the opportunity to live long enough to see things everyone said were wrong to now everyone believing them. Things that felt like you should never do them now, they're just natural. Every new church does them. And when we moved into a nightclub, 30-something years ago, that was not common. We were the only place I know of in the world doing that. And, when I named the church Mosaic and just used one name, there was no church in the world that only had like a singular name. And it was Saddleback Valley Community Church. And I would tell them, I said, watch, over 20 years, you're just going to go all the way back to Saddleback. And, Willow Creek Community Church said, like, eventually you're just going to be known as Willow Creek. And, I think even like Hillsong had another name, right? It's
Christian
like,
Family Center or something.
Yeah. And when I only named it Mosaic, I would get all this, reaction saying, are you ashamed of the church? Why doesn't it say Mosaic Church? And then they would always add it. I'd speak at conferences, I'd write books or newsletters or magazines, and they want to add church. And I'd call them up and say, you have to take church off of it, because that's not the name. The name's Mosaic. And they would say, yeah, but how will they know it's a church if we don't add church? I go, well, how do they know I'm a human? I don't wear a shirt that says I'm a human. And they'll know we're the church if our essence is the church. And it wasn't just a name change. It wasn't just a marketing idea. It was an essential philosophical shift, saying churches put Baptists on it because it let people know Baptists were welcome here. Churches put Assembly of God so that people know Assembly of God people are welcome here. We would name our churches to let people know who belonged here. And we reversed it out. We said we're Mosaic, we're broken and fragmented pieces that become a work of art when we're brought together by the master artist, especially when light strikes through us. And we made our name the name for those who did not believe, rather than for those who believed. And those were shifts that we were making 30 years ago that now are just commonplace around the world. Now, all around the world, it seems like every church only has one name. Yep. Whether it's Tapestry or Oasis or, or VU or, right? And it's now the common. And I think one of the great privileges I had in my life is to live long enough to see those shifts become just common.
Are you about to switch it to Mosaic of the Valley on Doheny, Sunset Boulevard Church?
There you go.
As soon as everyone takes it on, we gotta shift it around. When you think back on your journey, I think maybe sometimes people say that you're ashamed of the church, but I suppose my question, I wonder for you, from a place of honesty and reflection, do you feel like the church has celebrated you, or it's more criticized you?
Oh, I think my wife celebrates me and my kids celebrate me, and they criticize me too. That's life. You cannot do anything meaningful without critique and criticism. And I think sometimes, the criticisms were probably valid. And I think sometimes the criticisms were generated by fear or misunderstanding. And ironically, and I don't want to maybe say names, but some of those leaders actually came to me 30 years later and apologized. And I didn't need an apology. I felt like they were doing what they believed was right. And maybe I was wrong. I always had that in my head, going, maybe how I'm trying to do this isn't the best idea, or maybe it isn't right. I just felt it was true. to who I was as a person. And I felt it was true what God was calling me in my life. So I think I've lived with an immense amount of criticism. I mean, even to the point where people, tried to kill me. And that affected my family. And it wasn't non-Christians trying to kill me, it was Christians who said they were going to kill me. And so I lived in that reality during those seasons. It was not easy. I mean, Rich, for 5 years, I had a twitch in my right eye from the stress I carried. Creating the new and the unknown and advancing the church into the future wasn't my easiest path. It was my hardest path. It was a lonely path. It was a path I had to decide to be willing to walk alone. And one of the things I actually really love about you, and I know sometimes it doesn't work out in long terms, but you always had like this little rat pack. You always had people in your life, and you always had people that you invested in, they invested in you. And frankly, it's one of the things I really admired about you is I thought, I wish I'd had that. It would have been like the most beautiful thing in the world. But sometimes in life, when God speaks to you, he doesn't really always tell you that others are going with you. He just tells you to go, and then you have to trust that others will come later. And it was a very, very challenging. There were decades where I just didn't know if I could do it. And what was so ironic for me is that I really wanted to be accepted and loved. Right,
Yeah.
And I remember somebody asked me one time, it's so amazing. You don't even need anyone's affirmation or acceptance or love. And I'm going, are you out of your mind? I longed for that. I just had to make decisions that cost me that. I had to choose, in a sense, uniqueness over acceptance. And because that's the path that I think I was called to live.
You're extremely gifted in so many different categories, but I think it's safe to say that your superpower has been the gift of communication, and then your discipline to sharpen that skill and wield that sword. And I think you only get better and better and better. But it seems like the path that God has put you on as you've brought the church forward, but not just the church. You've operated in so many different spheres and spaces, whether that's entrepreneurs and business, coaching people, writing so many different projects. This latest book that you've just written on the 7 frequencies of communication, share a little bit about why this message is so important to you, and what is it like talking about talking, or preaching about preaching, or teaching about teaching, because that's essentially what you've been trying to do. Sometimes it's like, I can do this. I can't teach you how to do this, but when I hear you talk on this stuff, you've got real language and real handles that can help people get better.
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of the wonderful things about the church that people don't realize. So much of the best in the world has come out of the church. I mean, the best music in America has come out of the church. And I would always notice that whenever the church cared about something, it just created world-class expressions of it. And the church really does develop great communicators. When you listen to politicians, you go, that's a great communicator in the political world, but they would be a below average communicator in the church.
Talk about it.
And Rich, if you took your skills and went into politics, you would be a higher orator than like Ronald Reagan. They would be going, who is this guy? And it's because when you do something, even accidentally, for those 10,000 hours, and you commit to that craft, I mean, every week you're writing a message, you're preparing it, you're learning how to connect to the audience. And as your church has grown, you've actually had to grow, it's different speaking to 50 people than to 500 people, than to 5,000 people. And that dynamic grows. And I'm absolutely convinced that this book has come out of this incredible gift I've been given of coming to faith and then being in the church and listening to the best communicators on the planet. And when I was in my early 20s, I could not believe the gifting inside of Christianity to be able to express vision and truth and insights and ideas. And I saw the power of communication, because communication gripped me. Listening to those individuals talk about things that I would have thought were irrelevant, Abraham or Moses. Who in the 21st century is sitting around talking about Moses? But when someone has the power of communication. They can take a story that was written thousands of years ago and make it so real and so dynamic and so present that it changes your life. And so I think that those 45 years of experience of not only communicating but experiencing great communicators has made me aware that there's something going on beyond words. There's a supernatural, a transcendent experience that happens when we talk to each other. And from a scientific perspective, it's kind of cool because we think that our humanity ends at our skin. But the truth is, right now I'm speaking to you and you're speaking to me, and so my sound is going into your soul and your sound is going into my soul. And we're actually making a transcendent connection where there is no separation between us. And to me, this is an extraordinary experience that human beings have. You know what it's like when DC looks at you at just the right moment and says, I love you. It shakes inside of your soul in those moments where your kids are holding you or they were running and saying, Daddy, come back, and you feel the visceral connection between you and another human being. And so communication is so much more than some utilitarian ability to transmit knowledge. It's the way human beings develop deep connections. And so it was actually Aaron who asked me to create a gift for people around communication. And he challenged me to go home and think through something I could put together in a 15-minute package for people. It was a Friday, and they were going to film on Monday, and we were going to create this video gift. And I spent the next 72 hours not sleeping and sweating profusely and just being in this state of, I can't even explain it, where I just began seeing these frequencies. And by Monday morning, I had identified these 7 dynamic frequencies of communication, and we ended up filming for 6 hours, everything I saw over those 72 hours. And what I identified was that there are a lot of human frequencies, but there are 7 dynamic human frequencies of communication: the motivator, the challenger, the commander, the healer, the professor, the seer, and the maven. And we can identify a person's primary frequency. We have a small assessment that people can take, and it'll identify your core frequency, then the 2 other secondary frequencies. And what's been really fascinating for me is that as I've been able to unwrap these, and we've assessed almost 20,000 people now, we can actually identify how people relate to each other, how they misunderstand each other, and how to help you connect more effectively. And one of the examples of this would be, and there's a shadow side, by the way, on each one of these frequencies. After I created the frequencies, we were doing a call on our Arena Mastermind. It's our online business mastermind. And I said, hey, pick a TV show, and I'll identify the frequencies of the characters. The 2 main shows that people were interested in were Friends, which I did not know was still a thing, but it's still a thing. And the other one was a show called...
The one about communication.
Yeah.
That's all the titles are.
Succession.
Wow.
So I was really fascinated by Succession. So I said, okay, I'm going to identify the frequencies based on Succession. So I went in and watched the pilot. I couldn't find a single frequency. And I almost had a panic attack going, the 7 frequencies don't work. I can't identify a single frequency. And I stepped back and I started reflecting and processing this and going back and looking at the show again, watching 2, 3 episodes and still not finding a frequency. And all of a sudden I heard this inner voice that said, look at the shadows. And I realized that every communication frequency in the show Succession was a shadow frequency. Because every one of these frequencies, the motivator has the shadow of the performer. The challenger has the shadow of the manipulator. The commander has the shadow of the dictator. The healer has the shadow of a cipher. The professor has the shadow of the diminisher. The seer has the shadow of the perfectionist. And the maven has the shadow of the nihilist. Wow. And when I went back, there were 7 main characters who had exactly the 7 different frequencies. And every season was nothing but shadow frequencies. None of them ever communicated from their authentic positive frequency. And that opened up a whole new world of investigation for me, because I realized this generation is being taught how to communicate from negative frequencies, which is why there's so much hate and vitriol on social media. Because once you disconnect people from each other, it's easier to speak from your shadow. because there's no retribution, there's no consequence, and you can't see the pain you're causing another human being. And I've had several CEOs who have taken the assessment who have told me I didn't see myself until I read the section on shadows in the book. And so one of the things that is really interesting that I did not expect to come out of this book, because I get the question now, okay, how do I come out of my shadow? And there's no technique. There is not a single methodology or technique that can move you out of your shadow into your positive frequency. Your soul has to change. Because a communication frequency is not something you have, it's something you are.
Yep.
And so the only way to get out of the performer and get into your motivator frequency is to deal with the fear and the sense of insignificance and the image management that protects you from being rejected and hurt and unloved by other people. Like the only way to get out of the shadow of a challenger, which is a manipulator, is to deal with bitterness and envy and greed and avarice in your life. And so I realized, wow, in these 7 frequencies, we actually found a way to talk to people about their soul. Because the only way to move into the positive frequencies is to have a healthy soul. When you're motivated by love and hope and joy, when you're motivated by compassion and empathy, the positive frequency is natural. But if you're filled with bitterness and envy and greed and hatred and judgmentalism, you're always going to speak from your shadows.
Whew. I'm listening to you, and the preacher in me goes, the only way to get out of the shadows, you got to step into the light.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And there's something about what Jesus does. I believe that whatever you're full of is what you're eventually going to be led by.
That's right.
So, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. But what I think you're doing on a very practical level, we could definitely talk from the theological or even philosophical language with it, but from a practical standpoint, I find like a lot of people in life, how would I say it? Like you can't steward that which you don't understand.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think there's a lot of things about life. It's like, oh, I want to love my wife. I don't understand her. And so it's like, it's hard to manage that thing. I would say that with like a business. I think some things, the Spirit of God anoints you, but you have to grow your capacity, because if I can't measure something, it's going to be hard to manage it. And so one of the things I think that you're doing that's so helpful here is when I can see myself and I can identify, and also even knowing my dark side or my shadow side is tremendously freeing, because I think it's Carl Jung who talks about the shadow of, in his psychology, which I don't know where he lands all the way, but so much of like 80% of our shadow side is actually gold if it can be redeemed or if it can be brought into the light or if we can redirect that. And I think that's what you're doing here with this project. Communication is leadership.
Yeah.
Like communication is life. Communication is worship. I mean, it's how our soul transcends. As a communicator, you are so inspiring, but I don't think that's your end-all goal. What is your end-all goal? And I guess maybe every sphere is a little bit different, but the tool of communication, what is it that you're after?
I want to change the way people see reality, because I feel like if I can help people have a new way of seeing themselves and the world and reality, it will change their entire life. And in a sense, I think that my driving motivation is to get people to leave the matrix, and to live a life of self-deception, self-delusion, and actually begin to live truly free. And you're right. The opposite of the shadow is the light. And we've talked about this, that really the frequencies are expressions of light, because they're really focused on the good of others. And the shadow is really focused on our own self-serving intention. And so it's really about self versus service in that dynamic. And I think what you mentioned about Jung is actually very true. You can't ignore your shadow.
Yeah.
You actually want to understand it so you can speak more honestly to all of humanity. You can really connect with other people when you connect honestly with yourself. And, one of the things I even talk with our communicators are, it's easy to tell other people what's wrong with them without you ever processing that it's also wrong with you.
Very good.
And you're never judgmental when you've jumped in first and looked at yourself and dealt with your own insecurity or pain or selfishness or greed or wherever it may be, under your bitterness. And once you've grappled with your own, now you can pull people to the light.
The idea with the shadow, if you don't deal with the shadow, confront the shadow, even accept the shadow, you find yourself burying it and you find yourself ashamed of it. And shame doesn't produce anything good.
Yeah.
It's hard to bring healing. It's hard to bring ministry of any sort when you're hiding something.
Yeah.
And I think that's been even a journey for me of just going, all right, there's parts of me that are flawed and parts of me that are weak. And I think in my own perfectionist kind of personality or control mechanism, shame can be the feeling. And it's like I'm trying to learn how to go, hey, I can see that. I can accept that part of me. And the more I understand it and the more I face it with reality, I'm thinking about like Jacob wrestling with God, but we also we have to wrestle at times with ourselves. Like as I wrestle with my own humanity, I think what comes out on the other side is really, really beautiful. And someone asked me the other day, like, you got the Mature Me podcast, like, what is your definition of maturity? Which is kind of funny because I'm like, I guess I never really, I probably should actually define that. But in many ways, it's sort of what you're saying. Like, I think maturing is becoming helpful. And maybe that's too reduced down a simplified of a word. It's that. It's like I want to be others focused, not me focused. When I become service focused, I become self-aware, not self-absorbed. I love the idea of your name. Like we don't have to say we're church. Either we are or we're not. Like you'll know. And I think your communication right now, I've been watching this, past year with the LA fires and, Aaron sent me a video one night of like this fire right behind Mosaic. I mean, just some of the most daunting, scary footage I've ever seen. And so many people that you guys know have lost your homes, but you don't just give a speech. It's like you're giving a speech now to mobilize people to go do something. Like love is an action.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like all of your language and communication is moving me to an action. It's freeing me to go and be who God's called me to be.
Yeah, I love that. And it's true. I do think I have a deep drive to call out greatness in people, to call out the image of God in people, to call out what is asleep in them. I'm convinced there's a hero inside of everyone waiting to be awakened. And so I do feel that's like a driving core inside of me. I always felt insignificant. I felt like I had no talent, no gifting, that I've never amounted to anything in my life. And as I discovered that there was something inside of me that was worth redeeming, and
worth redeeming,
I realized I think that all the good stuff of who I was trapped under the rubble of all my pain and uncertainty, insecurity, and fear and doubt. And for me, it was entering into a relationship with Jesus that it's like all those boulders started getting removed, and all of a sudden, I felt like God was just going, "Hey, this is who I put inside. You just don't know who you are yet." And you talked about shame. I thought, guilt is about what you do, but shame is about what you are, who you are. And I do think that's why shame goes deeper, because when we become convinced that we're not a person of value or worth, worthy of love or acceptance or even calling. You lead an incredible organization, ministry, church, and there has to be something inside of you that constantly reminds you that you're worthy of this calling. That otherwise you wouldn't have the courage or strength to go forward with that. And the first verse anyone ever gave me, I was about to speak. I'd only been a Christian a few months, and somebody crocheted this little Bible verse for me. I still have it to this day, 46 years later. It said, Erwin, I didn't know it was in the Bible, but it was so cool. It said, Erwin can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. And this woman, Barbara Price, handed it to me right before I spoke. And when she gave me that, it jarred me because I don't think I'd gotten that far in the Bible yet, to Philippians, And so I was like, wow, this is in the Bible. And I don't think sometimes we don't even realize how much of the Bible is trying to re-engineer your internal thinking. Like the moment you accept that I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me, it is a redesigning of your mind.
Yeah.
And from a person who didn't think he could accomplish anything, now I can do all things. And I think sometimes we underestimate, because it's so important to inspire people every week, right? You just want people to be inspired and encouraged.
Sure.
But what you're really doing is that you're an interior designer. You're a mind architect. You are shifting. You're shifting the way people think about themselves, the way they think about the world, the way they think about life, the way they think about God. And when that redesign happens, they naturally then begin to live the life they're created to live, which is really exciting. And I know we've gone off the track on communication.
No, I like it.
But by the way, it's funny. I gave the assessment to my wife, Kim. I've been married 41 years, and her number one frequency is commander. And she's a pure commander. And she's really nailed it. And and so I joke about
very submissive.
The fact that when I walk in and Kim says, "Take out the garbage," that's her hello.
Yeah.
And I've learned to translate that to, "Oh, I've missed you so much. I love you, and I need your help." And because commanders are very utilitarian, so they move right toward the action. But also it's funny because our son Aaron, who's 36, is also a commander. So I have a wife who's a commander and a son who's a commander. He's my business partner. So I never lack for clarity about what I should do with my life. and it really helped with Aaron because when he saw he was a commander, he sent me a text and he said, "Hey, Dad, I'm about to send you 5 ideas. And they're just ideas. I don't even know if I agree with them, but they're all going to come across as commands." And then he gave me the 5 ideas, and they were all commands. And it's helped me a lot to realize that even though it's coming across as a command, it's actually just a suggestion or an idea or a possibility. He doesn't even know if he agrees. But because the frequency is so strong, I think it's command, and I think he's asking me just to approve it.
Really good.
And that's helped us tremendously. And Mariah, her primary strength is her frequency as a challenger. And, Mariah is the sweetest, most loving, she's like the most extraordinary human being. But I have to tell you that, I would say 90% of her texts to me are usually a challenge.
Yeah.
They're very short. They're letting me know how I can improve and or what I didn't get quite right.
Right.
And I don't even think she knows that she's challenging. And just in the last few weeks, she sent me a note, and it was a complete challenge. And I sent a little response back, letting her know, no, I didn't change anything. That's what was already on the schedule. She goes, "Oh, okay, I misunderstood the schedule." But she comes with a challenge more than a question. So when you realize a person is a challenger, you realize, they're not mad at you.
Yep.
They don't even know that it's coming across.
Yep.
Because challengers always want to call you out and call you up. That's just the way that they communicate. And so with a challenger, you may feel like you're never good enough or you haven't done enough. But when you're really enjoying a challenger, you get filled with like this fire. Like I can eat raw meat and I'm going to take on the world and nothing can stop me. And that's the power of it. And so each one of these frequencies actually fills you with something.
Yeah.
Like I love being around motivators because I always feel better about myself. Like motivators have this natural ability to cause you to believe in yourself. They just fill you with energy and encouragement. And it's almost like they don't see what's wrong with you. They only see what's right with you. And they're just always calling out what's right in you. I mean, who doesn't want that?
Right.
And that's why I think some of the most popular social media communicators are motivators.
Yep.
And they encourage, they bring energy, they elevate self-belief. I have a friend who's a high motivator. And before he believed in Jesus, he was an energy coach.
There you go.
And because he believed that he needed to increase everyone's energy and self-belief. And now that he actually follows Jesus, he still is about energy, but now he's saying you need to deepen your belief in Jesus and believe in yourself the way he believes in you. So he just took the same language and shifted it, but well, now Jesus is at the center of it, but he's still this motivator.
Yep.
And so as you understand the different frequencies, you can learn how to interpret people better.
Yep.
And for me, on a very personal note, I just gave it to my mom, who's 87 years old.
Wow.
My mom is brilliant. She's incredibly talented and gifted. She's probably, has been able to speak 6-7 languages in her life. And when I gave it to her, because I have access to all 7, so her 7th frequency, the one that was, in fact, she had 5 frequencies so high they could all be a primary frequency.
Wow.
And then her 6th frequency dropped, and then her 7th frequency was almost non-existent.
Wow.
And her 7th frequency is my primary frequency. And when I saw that, I realized that's why we just couldn't connect. I know my mom loves me, and I love my mom, but even at 66, I always felt that massive disconnection. I just felt that she never understood me. And she would say, I never understood you. And she would, and as she got older, she said, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't understand who you were. And as I looked at the frequencies, I don't know why, but it just gave me a sense of like a place to breathe, to go, one, I believe that God is a God of intentionality. So I'm going, he gave me that mom and made me like this. And so maybe that environment was the environment that would only really nurture that unique frequency and gift in me. And I think I needed that contrast and needed the tension and even being misunderstood, because that helped me understand others. I don't know if I would be as empathetic if I had grown up in a different environment.
Yep.
And so even things like that can help you because you understand each other better. You can laugh about it. You can actually begin to be more strategic. I tell a lot of men who have commander frequencies, you can't take that home to your 8-year-old daughter. I know it works for you and your company. And I know it helps you streamline with, 500 employees. But when you're home with your 8-year-old daughter and you come in only with the command frequency, you're going to crush that little soul. And so you need to learn how to access different frequencies. And by the way, this is different than a personality test. It's not static. You are your personality. This is the way you're designed. This is who you are. This is not the frequencies. You have a primary frequency that is the most natural frequency from which you speak. But the goal is to access more and more frequencies. At the level of communicator you are, you probably access at least 3 frequencies so naturally and so often that you're not even aware of it. And as you continue to grow as a communicator and grow, not just on stage, but as you learn how to communicate more and more with your wife and with your kids, and you'll probably add 4 and 5 frequencies. And my ideal hope for people is that they are able to access all 7 frequencies whenever they need one, because that, I think, is the full expression of being human. I don't want to have an excuse and say, I'm not a healer, so I don't ever have to use that frequency. Are you out of your mind? That's such an important frequency. All of us need to learn how to access that. Say, I don't like research or data, so I don't need to have a professor frequency. Well, then you just choose to be stupid, and to not be valid in your opinions and your positions. Every one of these frequencies adds something really rich and beautiful to our life.
I know, it's annoying when you're in the middle of a conversation and someone interrupts like this, but I wouldn't do it unless it was really, really important. Listen, this is an ad-free podcast. However, we do tell you about some of the great things that we are doing right here on the ground in Miami, Florida. And I want to speak to you about something that really means a lot to me, and that is VooCon 2025. Are you looking to grow? Do you want to build community? Do you want to strengthen your faith? Something tells me the answer is yes. That's why you're watching Mature Me. Well, I want to invite you to Miami, Florida, June 19th through the 21st for VooCon 2025. Listen to me. This is going to be our greatest year yet. Our theme this year is Dying to Be Different. It's 3 incredible days in the Watsco Arena. You've never, ever experienced the power of God until you've got into an arena with 7,000 other people lifting up one name. The entire convention is all about encountering God, equipping the church, and empowering the next generation of leaders. This year, we've got Sadie Robertson, we've got Darius Daniels, we've got Voo Worship, and trust me, there are so many other guests that are coming. Right now, quickly, go to VooCon.com to get registered, and I will see you in Miami in June. Let's get back to the combo. I think what you're highlighting is really important because, I've always loved Strengths Finders or even Enneagram, and I know there's some believers out there like, you can't do any of that stuff. I've always found those things just to be tools to help enhance and advance and me get more acquainted with myself. Where it's dangerous is when you label yourself and you go, this is what I'm not. It's like, okay, I think we're allowed, even your personality. What is your personality? It's a pattern of behavior. Like sometimes I meet people, it's like, they'll say, I'm late and that's because I'm from, hey, like late is not an ethnicity. Like, I'm sorry, like some of this stuff, You're
going to say because you're a Latino.
Well, I'm just going where you're in Miami. It's Miami time. Okay, well, you can change, you can become, you can grow. And so even the way you're talking about the frequencies, we're not just talking about public communication and being an orator, although I think many people that are listening to this probably do want to grow in that, pastors and leaders. But I firmly believe that the quality of my life really depends on the quality of my relationships.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know what? I've been married to the same woman for 18 years. But what I know is this, is the woman that I married 18 years ago is not the same woman. And I'm not the same guy.
Yeah.
And we have to constantly and continually learn each other and discover one another. And by the way, the discovery and the learning is what leads to all that loving and growing. That's what makes it fun and exciting, the chase and pursuing. But I've got to keep growing in my communication. And my organization is not the same as it was 5 years ago. And I can't, that thing that used to motivate people and how I did that, I need a new skill. I need to pull out a new tool. And I think what you're speaking about is so helpful. And I think people need to land on that these are tools and this is to help give you insight so that you can create the reality in the world that you want to step into. What's fun about this to me is because you're helping people in all forms of communication, but in your own career and life, you are known as like one of the greatest communicators, one of the greatest public speakers. What's kind of fascinating or ironic is you've also like never shied away from a controversy. You've also find yourself stepping on landmines and in many ways being misunderstood. What has that tension been like for you of going, hey, I'm giving my life to being a great communicator, yet somehow, no matter how many times I'm trying to lead with empathy and growing, I still often feel misunderstood. How have you reconciled some of that?
Yeah, I think that my highest intention is to elevate the way people think more than even the way they communicate. You cannot be a great communicator if you're not a really great thinker.
Great.
And you can have great skills, but you'll hit a ceiling. Because when people say, well, how do I move to this level of communication? I say, well, then you have to elevate your level of thinking. And so most of the controversies I've had, and I have a lot of them, we had one last week, and is because I'm trying to affect the way people think. I'm not trying to teach people what to think. I'm trying to teach people how to think. And most of the time when I'm misunderstood is that people don't want to be taught how to think. They want me to agree with what they think. And it shocks them when I don't think what they think, when I don't have the same conclusion they have. Which is really funny when people will post things like, I've been following you for 20 years and I've loved all your books, but this is it. You know, this is the line. Unfollow, I'm burning your books. I'm going, wait a minute. You trust me for 20 years and now this one disagreement invalidates everything I've ever learned. What does it say about you? You've been listening to the wrong person for 20 years. Or does that mean you actually don't listen to anyone? You just thought you were listening to me. You just liked whenever I agreed with you.
There you go.
But when someone disagrees, the only time you know if you're listening to someone is when they disagree with you. The rest of the time, you're just listening to yourself and someone's resonating with you.
Wow.
And so I do create controversy, sometimes accidentally. Sometimes I'm in shock because, I used to say in a more like maybe undiplomatic way that Jesus saves you from your sins, but he doesn't save you from your stupidity. Like sins are forgiven, stupidity takes work to come out of.
Yep.
And just because you believe in Jesus doesn't suddenly make you smart. Smart takes work. And, elevating our thinking takes work.
Yep.
And so I just accept the fact that if I say anything of any significance, someone will agree and someone will disagree. If no one dislikes what I've said, actually no one likes it.
There you go.
If what I've said is so unimportant that it doesn't create any emotional tension, it wasn't really worth saying.
Wow.
So I have accepted the fact that I'm always going to say things that will alienate some people and will liberate other people. I'm choosing to make that statement or make that decision for the people I liberate.
Powerful.
And that's the only responsibility I have. I don't have a responsibility for you to agree with me. And in fact, if I say something and you completely disagree with me, I've actually helped you clarify. So in that sense, you should be thanking me.
Yeah.
I've clarified your thinking by having a position that you so much disagree with that now you're more clear. And I listen to people on every extreme of things. And in fact, I don't believe I understand an issue until I can reflect it back the way that person expresses it.
It's very good.
And I want to be able to defend their position before I actually can attack it.
Can't disagree with you until I first agree with you.
Yeah.
Just meaning that I understand the argument, I understand the point of view, the position. I think in this day and age right now, and I think what you're aiming to do is to be as clear in terms of where you stand or how you see it or how you perceive it or how you're thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And to do that, it means you have to make a decision. And as soon as I decide something, immediately I divide. Yeah. Like, that's the world of this polarizing space that we're in. And I think the other day, I think your take was actually really great and really charitable.
It was on Elon Musk.
Yeah, and very empathetic. I was like, I don't know what's happening here. I think that you guys were like very sweet and kind, but they came at you guys. This is maybe kind of a high level communication question, and maybe we're going to lose some people here, but I'm just kind of curious. Like you just said this phrase, Jesus will save you from your sins, but he won't save you from stupidity. That's a powerful phrase. That's something that you landed, that you wrote, that you've said, that's in you. Maybe you've said that for 40 years. I don't know. But sometimes there comes a place with you, and maybe some of the areas that you'll challenge me, and I'm still always trying to think about it. I don't take it as like, I receive it. But when something kind of becomes cliche or phraseology or just some kind of like a handle that's not attached to anything, I think where I'm always impressed, and what I've loved about the long format that you do or spaces like this, is that you have your own cadence and there's like a rhythm to it. Like your humor, you can say something that's not supposed to be funny, but you know how to like make a punchline, or you know how to create the tension of the opposite from like, maybe my brain can only go light and dark. You can do that over and over again, up and down, left and right, but maybe these complex vocab words. What I'm trying to land on is, how many things these days in your life is a phrase that you've thought out, that you've put together, or how many like on a week that you're just, this is all new phrases that I'll never use again? When does something become valuable that you take with you, tuck in your pocket? Like, that's
a really interesting question.
Does that make sense? Like, I feel like, because you do care about the phrase, but I feel like you move on, and it's like,
I almost,
does that question make sense?
It's a great question.
Does that make sense?
It's interesting because every cliche at one time was profound.
Yeah.
And it only becomes a cliche because now it becomes so common that everyone says it.
Okay.
In a sense. And so what you want to do is, if you like that cliche because you like what it carries inside of it, it's not the cliche you like, it's the truth it's holding, right?
Let's use let go and let God.
Yeah, let go and let God.
You hate that.
Yeah. And so I go, see, let me tell you why that's a cliche.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not about letting go, it's taking hold. And so when a statement is absolute and I go, no, I can think of 500 exceptions, I go, that's a cliche. But I always go, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like let go of your life and trust God and everything like that, you know. And so those don't work for me because I don't think it gives people a way to actually apply it in their life.
Okay.
Because you can't let go of your marriage, you got to take hold of it. Yeah, there's a lot, you know, you see, and so that's my adversarial mind. Like one of our speakers said a statement the other day that you're only moved by things you give access to. I wrote it down right away, and I said, except everything else. And so a few weeks later, I met with him. I said, let me tell you why your talk didn't work for me. Because this was your opening statement early on. You're only moved by the things you have access to. What you should have said is, we're moved by two things. The things that are out of our control that we did not invite, and the things that are within our control that we do invite. And those are the things we give access to. Because in that statement, we didn't give access to the fires. They destroyed our houses, right? You know, we don't give access to the drunk driver who runs a red light. He just crashed into your car. And so my mind immediately goes to, what's the lie in the cliche? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
And I can't help it. I just burn through cliches like that. And they really disturb me because they make life simplistic. Well, but what we're really trying to do is make it simple. Simple's good. Simplistic is dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's great language too.
If you're going to use that cliche, go, I almost like do it tongue in cheek. Say it and they go, accept.
Yep.
when God tells you to take hold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so you can still use the
Qualify it.
cliche and then qualify it, and then people go, oh, he's in real life.
And reveal to somebody that you see more of what just is the tip here, that there's something attached to something larger.
Because
bigger,
everyone's experiencing the other exception. Yep. Just like the name of the podcast is
Mature Me.
Mature Me. Like immediately when you were giving definite maturity, like I had a thought right away. Oh, for me, maturity is all about the scale of personal responsibility.
Great.
And so if I think long enough, I could craft like a nice cliche-ish kind of statement.
Yeah, a phrase that goes with it.
A phrase that goes with it. I love quotable statements. So
I love that stuff.
So I think, and you're brilliant enough to do this. Write all your favorite cliches and go, I'm going to create my own version of it in a way that no one's ever heard it.
Great.
Because there's, in a sense, two ways of being original. Saying something no one has ever said, or saying it in a way no one's ever said it.
Very good.
See, there it is. It's a paradox, right?
Will you remember that and tuck that away and use it again, or just
I will.
Do you think that filed just now with you? Like you can say it again that way, or
I can. Yeah, I kind of.
That's powerful, though.
I kind of remember like almost everything, and except where I was yesterday. So the things everyone else remembers, I don't remember, but those things stay. But it's because great statements create categories in your brain, and they allow other truths to seep into it. And so then when you go, okay, there is this original. You go, no. If I were really honest, I was influenced by Aristotle. And I go, so it's not an original statement, but I can say it in an original way. I can say it in a new way that no one's ever said it. Like on the wall out there, it's like divinity. There's divinity in your creativity. Yeah. I look at that and go, that's a new way of saying, that creativity is a natural result of spirituality. And written on that wall, it's not a cliche. It is actually something for me, very transcendent. Like when I saw there's divinity inside of creativity, it's quotable, memorable, but not kitschy. It's not fast fashion. Cliches are fast fashion.
Strong. That's great. No, it totally makes sense to me.
But quotable statements are timeless.
How did you learn your humor and your skill of that in terms of, because you always sort of talk about like, I was insecure, I didn't think I had anything valuable. Could you always tell a story really good? When did you go, I'm pretty good at this? I think your humor is so uniquely you, but I also feel like it's a skill, and I keep saying this way, correct me where I'm wrong. I'm telling you what I observe. It feels like, oh, I need to be light. I need to bring some levity to this moment. And quickly, I'm like, shouldn't even be funny. But Erwin can say it and flip it and punch there. Like, it's like, the art of a punchline, I guess. I think sometimes I stumble into that stuff. And I'm like, oh, I can kind of repeat that again. But I don't know if I can totally articulate how I did that, why I did that. I can feel. Yeah. But sometimes I have some really bad nights where it's like, that did not go. And
first, I'm going to be really honest. I love this observation.
Yeah. Oh, I just think
I love being funny. And I don't know if I've ever said that publicly in my life.
It's great. It's very vulnerable. Yeah.
But
you're very funny though. I don't think everyone goes, Erwin's really funny, because I think that you're always so profound and always but like, this guy is hilarious throughout the whole thing.
Because I love Dave Chappelle because I think it's the same kind of humor as mine. Yeah. It's an observation of reality and saying it in a way that is unexpected.
Yep.
And early on, I did learn how to tell stories at a very young age. When I would put my little sisters to bed, and normally someone would read them a book, and now I'm 10, 11 years old, they're 5 years younger than me. Every night I would make up stories instead of reading the books. I would make up universes, characters, the entire fable every single night. And then if they didn't like the ending because I killed off a hero, I would go, and then I'd change the chapter. And so I learned how to tell stories at a very young age. And not by magic, but because I read stories. I read science fiction, and I was drawn toward imagination. And those people like Robert Heinlein and Tolkien and Bradbury, they mentored me through their books and taught me the power of human imagination. I learned how to be funny because I had an older brother who was stronger, faster, bigger, and meaner than me. And so since I couldn't beat him up, I had to be quick-witted, and I wanted to slice and dice him with words. And so he helped me be funny, because you learn that language is a superpower. And my grandfather, who lived to 100 virtually, 1 month short, said the first thing he remembered me ever saying, and we were like 4 or 5 years old, and my brother asked me a question, and my grandfather said, you answered it, and Alex said, that's a stupid answer. And he goes, I'll never forget, you said, ask me a stupid question, and you'll get a stupid answer.
Sheesh.
And so somehow around 4, I realized that how you contextualize reality is a power. That's what humor is. Humor is how to contextualize reality. And then when I became a follower of Jesus, a pastor named Jim Henry in Orlando, Florida, would use those Christian cliche jokes.
Yep.
But since I wasn't a Christian, I didn't know them.
You loved them.
So I was hearing them for the first time, right? And they were all like the canned jokes that every pastor passes on, but I'd never heard them. But I noticed he did something very unique. He would tell a joke, we'd all laugh, then he'd say something really poignant. And because I don't know why, but I've always been like a acute student of the human experience. And I went, wait a minute, he used the joke to disarm me. And it opened up my soul. And he got that thing inside of me. I was unguarded. So I realized, humor is a way to connect to the audience, where the audience now develops a rapport with you. But I didn't want to be cliche-ish. I didn't want to use the canned jokes, and it didn't work for me. So I started speaking on street corners and then like the Mardi Gras and places like that. And it got so bad, and for me it was so good. I remember I would do like 30 minutes of stand-up comedy. And then at the end, I would bring in the Bible, right? And my wife, Kim, back then, she would go, what are you doing? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, you just told jokes. You were funny for like 40 minutes and then only preached for like 5. I go, but I had them. Like I had the room, you know? And so I had to learn how to like pare down being funny to actually like bring the content and the context for the message. But the rooms I was speaking to were not people who were open to me. I was speaking to gangbangers and drug cartels, and I was speaking in open areas in the projects. And if I didn't hold people, they were going to leave or pull their guns out.
Right.
And so I had to learn how to be dynamic, and there'd be planes flying over, and cars going by, and people beeping, and drug deals happening. And I would use all of that in my messaging. I would talk to the planes, to the cars going by, and the guy honking, and the alarms going off, and the deals going on.
Working it all in.
And I'm literally doing a set.
Yep. And
so when I opened the Mayan in L.A., the manager of the Rolling Stones came to one of the evening gatherings. He's Jewish, he was not a Christian. He didn't know it was a church. He came up to me afterwards, he said, how long's your gig here? And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, I can put you on Broadway starting next month. You'll do a one-man show. I've got you.
Should have done it.
I should have. I made a strategic error and in my life. Done it. And he actually thought I was a one-man show. And it's because my audiences have always been so anti-God.
Yep.
My audience has been cynical and antagonistic and, skeptical. So I had to learn how to hold that audience. And so I do love humor. And I actually do think 2 things about humor. Humor is the last thing you learn when you learn a new language.
That's deep. Never heard that.
Yeah, it is. It's because you can't understand nuance.
Yeah, you can't.
Because humor is all about nuance. And it's also one of the highest forms of intelligence. And so the funniest people in the world are actually brilliant people.
So bright.
And I just think it was like, I'm not as funny now as I used to be.
I think I guess I didn't hear you way back then. I think you're hilarious, and I don't think people talk about it much. My dad, for years, he was on the road as itinerant, and he would spend his days in public schools. And so he had to work out these kind of, one-man talks. And when you go back and watch these videos, I mean, this was a stand-up comedy, right? And somehow you talk about the power of love. One of the things you just did just now that I've tried to do, I've watched you do this, is you'll start telling your joke and you'll start laughing at yourself. And whether it's completely authentic or it's even a skill set or we don't even know it subconsciously, it gives us permission that this is funny already. And so even laughing at my own joke, I've watched like the audience have permission to laugh along with you. And you'll see, I think Chappelle's so great because you'll see him do an arena, then you'll see him do a 50-person show. Yeah. And sometimes before the punchline hits, he's already cracking himself up. Or when you're watching SNL and those skits and they get the giggles, it's so endearing and powerful.
The laughing is just very natural.
Yeah.
But one of the things I had to learn too, and I think I picked this up from David Letterman, and now we're going into like deep comedy.
Come on. It's, if people are still with us, they're with us. If not, if they don't like this, they're gone. But I'm enjoying it. Is
David Letterman would tell a lot of bad jokes. He just would miss the mark. And what made him funny was how he reacted to his bad joke.
Very good.
So I told myself, if I can be absolutely humble and just leave my pride off stage, even if I'm not funny, I can make fun of myself. And the humor will be actually in the response to not being very good. And they'll go with you, along the way. And I just think it's a great way of dealing with very difficult issues. Like, so when I'm dealing with things that are incredibly painful or challenging or controversial, I actually think it's really important to be able to see the unexpected perspective and then bring that into the conversation.
On my journey as a communicator, there's definitely these moments where I think I feel the imposter syndrome, and maybe it's just being a pastor, but sometimes you're like, I'm really good at this. Other times I genuinely am going, I should never grab a microphone. I mean, it could be that. I'm not saying that to be like exaggerating. I'm like, I don't know how to put words together. I'm not smart. But one of the things that like I've learned, and I'm going to give you a moment to kind of coach into this, is like, I do pretty good. I think I resonate sometimes with a comedian because like they're kind of working out a bit and they'll go try this stuff and they kind of string together 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And sometimes I've discovered in certain messages, like actually that message flew because I had grasped and understood where this was going, and it's a conglomeration of thoughts put together. Like tonight, I'm going to speak to these pastors, and I know it's a good message. I don't know how confident my delivery will be. Like I think I like Sunday mornings preaching a bunch. Like most of the time, what we put on the internet these days is like the second or third service. I don't know if, and maybe you'd watch and go, they're both the same, bro. But I feel so much more different when I feel like I know where that's moving and that's how that's twisting. Once again, a compliment to you, like going, I think you're almost like the opposite. Like you'd almost like to have brand new, like spontaneous things, and you want to work. It's like it's fun or like risk taking to you up there. And I like spontaneity. I just like to have what I've got. What would you say to me, maybe in terms of how I can improve that, or if
I know exactly what you should do.
Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, it's your unfiltered self is the most dangerous you and the funniest you. When you're trying to be very controlled and very filtered, you will be less naturally funny, but more polished. So there's a give and a take on both. And no one's really experienced my unfiltered self. I know my unfiltered self, and it's hilarious. And if I haven't been a pastor over the years, I could have done great stand-up because I could use my unfiltered self. But
does the same thing ring true with like just even preaching and profound thoughts? Like,
oh yeah.
Like do you, like you're going,
are you kidding? I am so filtered because I've learned as I've matured, it's not important to say everything you know or everything you believe or everything you think. It's important to share what will change people's lives. So when I'm standing on a stage, my goal is to change people's lives. It's not to share my most outlandish thoughts. Those are just for me and maybe people close to me. I have views of Genesis that are just so much fun, and I shared them a few little places along the way, but and one day they're going to come out in a book called The Other Side of the Moon. And I already know this, I've developed over the years, but allow yourself to be a little bit more unfiltered. You're a good human being inside. I'm not worried about the unfiltered Rich. But when you think about a truth, or when you look at the Bible, or when you're thinking about an issue, if you allow yourself to go, what if I really think about this? You're going to see stuff that you wouldn't see otherwise. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, and I remember one time there was this Bible study in Beverly Hills, and this Jewish guy came, and it was his first time reading the Bible, even the Old Testament. And they were studying King David, and he goes, David was a pervert. He just says it to the whole group, like, and
Already got me.
And literally all the Christians were like, no, he was a man after God's own heart. Except everywhere else,
yes, exactly,
where he wasn't, right?
Yes.
And so they called my brother, who was in LA at the time. They said, Alex, we don't know what to do with this guy. He's coming back next week. And we're supposed to explain to him how David is not a pervert. And the next week, Alex shows up, and the guy says, yeah, they're telling me that David's a man after God's own heart, but I'm reading all this stuff, and this guy is like the worst human being on the planet. And Alex goes, yeah, he was pretty horrible. And you're right, he was a pervert. And he was a murderer, and he was this and that. He goes, and he was probably the best human being on the planet. That's how bad things are. The guy goes, oh. And it was, instead of lying about who David was, he just told the truth about David and the rest of us.
Yep, very good.
Does that mean? And sometimes I think we feel an obligation to hide the truth from people. And if we just tell the truth, and sometimes the truth is pretty hilarious. That Eve had a better conversation with a snake than she did with her husband. The world hasn't changed that much. There's just so many things there that are just, so rich, right? That's why the funny thing for me, the first command of the Bible is eat freely. And they were naked and unashamed. I'm ashamed in the shower by myself, right? I can't be naked and unashamed. I mean, imagine a world where you can eat whatever you want and still be naked and unashamed.
Very good.
So I just start unwrapping the Bible going, it's just so funny.
That sounds like heaven.
What? Right?
That sounds like heaven.
It sounds like heaven. Yeah. That's what heaven is. And all the ice cream you want and no cellulite. It's like, and so there's a lot of interesting, and so when I look at the Bible, I always pull myself back and I go, hold on to nothing. Oh, let go and let God, right? And and
Here
so
it comes.
How many times has anyone ever explained who all the people Cain was afraid of were and where they came from? Our best theologians just lie about the Bible and pretend those people don't exist. The first two people are Adam and Eve. The next people are Abel and Cain, except all the other people in all the cities.
Yep.
Have you ever heard anybody explain that?
Nope. I'm still confused on the Nephilim, by the way, too, if you got some on that.
we don't tell each other the truth. And so if you take it as a truth, you go, okay, now I got to work my way backwards differently. So it's really simple. And I'll answer the Nephilim. Adam and Eve we think they were there for like 8 minutes, and then they sinned. Right? Because there was the sixth day, and then God created everything, and the seventh day they rested. On the eighth day, they fell. That's the way we think of the Bible. Right. That's why they go back to 4,004 years, because on the eighth day they fell. Except maybe, just maybe, Adam and Eve got it right for a long time and had lots of kids. Yep. And they had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren, and they populated the earth. And the story of Abel and Cain is a story of fallen humanity, not all of humanity. Ooh. And so then you have Abel and Cain, and now Cain's afraid to go to those other cities, and he's projecting on them, they will kill me. But he's the only murderer in the world because he's the first murderer, which means all the other cities had never experienced murder or any violation of the commandments. And then you look at Nephilim. That's, again, I'm going, these are theologians who are telling us these are angels. It says that the sons of God, right? The sons of God come and they see that the daughters of men are beautiful. And so then they have sex with them. They take them. And I've heard all these theologians go, those are angels. Except angels are not of the species of humans. It's like saying that a dog and a cat can actually have a cat, a dat, whatever it is, And that is not even biblical. I'm convinced that the sons of God were all of the humans who had not yet fallen, that were born before Abel and Cain.
Wow.
And then the sons of man are the children of Cain that were fallen. And then I think it's up to Genesis 5 when it says that they saw the daughters of men and found them beautiful. What it's actually describing is all the unfallen humans now falling because of the decay and deprivation of the fallen humans. And then it says, and God could not find one person who did what was right. So it was the end of the lineage of those pre-fall. And then it says, and in those days, there were heroes that walked among us, and the Nephilim, and those were the unfallen of humanity until they fell. And then you have the flood. See, I actually think there is a viable explanation of Genesis 1 through 5. But we can't get there because we're not allowed to think unfiltered.
Have you preached any of that? Or
no. This is just the things I think that, I don't know if the world needs, but maybe before I die, I'll write them down. And
it's quite a take. I've never heard that before.
I know. It's both original and originally said. And then to add to that, time travel is in the Bible. See, so like all these things, like because you have Elijah and Moses showing up with Jesus.
You got it in the New Testament too.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. No, Elijah and Moses showing up with Jesus.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Transfiguration.
Yeah. And
you got an Acts with Philip.
Yeah. And so you have time travel because Elijah doesn't die. Moses is now in a different time in history. And so if we ever are able to create the capacity to time travel, it's already in the Bible. And if we discover that we're from another planet, it's so simple. Because Genesis 1 through 5, the reason we can't find paradise, it would be another planet. And the ark is actually a spaceship of humanity leaving that planet and coming to this one.
Dear God.
And there's so many layers to the scriptures that I think are just untapped because we've been told that we have to believe everything we've ever been told. See, I actually believe in the Bible. I believe it is God-breathed and that it is his narrative to us. I just think we have a hard time believing everything that's in there. I mean, Philip, just like Elijah, teleported. I'm going, why don't we talk about that? You know why? Because it's hard to teleport. Because
we never seen it. And it's just, I think people create theologies for it not to happen. Obviously, is what we do see. I mean, you have this stuff does not take place anymore. But this man went 30 miles to another city from wherever it was, the desert of Gaza or the Gaza Strip road, whatever that road is, to I think Azotus, which is like a 30-mile distance. Mm-hmm. I have never heard someone say anything about the ark. What I would say to compliment, although I don't know if the ark is a spaceship, that was Erwin's take. I want to qualify that before I lose my entire ministry. However, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. That word world in the Greek there is cosmos, which is the universe. So guess what? If there are aliens, God loves them too. And I think that if the whole creation is there for the glory of God, well, if he created all of it, I don't think God's redemption plan is any way thwarted or stopped because there's life somewhere else. And so I think sometimes we're trying, maybe the way I would say what you're saying is like we're looking for ways not to believe as opposed to going, could God be actually bigger than our little 10% of our brain that we're using?
Yeah, when someone asked me, do I believe there's life on other planets? I said, what about if we are the life on other planets? Just like we used to think that the sun revolved around the earth. Why do we think this earth is the beginning of the story? And so I just...
Mature me, God.
What?
Mature me, God.
And that's why I don't think I'll ever get tired of like diving into the truths of the scripture. I think there's just so much there that's left untapped, like, having the mind of Christ. We act like we need the mind of Christ so we can stop sinning. Really, sin is just an act of like our foolishness. It's us going to the lowest level of ourselves. I don't think the mind of Christ is necessary to not sin. I think the mind of Christ is necessary to live an optimal life, to live an abundant life. I wasn't a Christian, and I'd already decided lying was not going to be something I did. I was morally pure until I got married, not because I was a Christian, but because as an unbeliever, I decided I didn't want to take advantage of another human being. And I actually think humans are capable of incredible ethics. And sometimes we forget that's actually possible because we don't usually choose that.
Yep.
And I think what Jesus does is he expands our mind, he expands our imagination, he expands our capacity to see the possibility of life. And And I don't think God's trying to make us superhuman. I actually think he's trying to make us human again. And this is what Jesus is reclaiming. And if I actually think before the fall, we'll go back there to Genesis if you want to.
I want to.
I don't think there was human language until the fall. I mean, why would Eve not be startled that a snake is talking to her? I mean, any human being would be shocked if that had never happened before. So it seems to me there was an organic connection between not only Adam and Eve, but all of creation. Communication is the way we hide ourselves. And even when you go to Babel. And communication at the deepest level is a soul connection. There are things you know from DC that she doesn't have to say to you. The more you love someone, the more you're connected to them. The more there's intimacy, the less you need words. And I actually think Adam and Eve, when it says they're naked and unashamed, I don't think it's their clothes. That's just the way we translate it. Actually, what it means is that there wasn't a thought Adam had or an emotion that he had that Eve did not know. There was not a thought that Eve had or an emotion she had that Adam did not know. They were literally transparent, and they were authentically connected, that everything was known. That's terrifying to me. Can you imagine if everyone knew everything you thought, everything you felt? Like, half of our life is protecting ourselves from the worst version of ourselves. And Adam and Eve didn't have to do that. They were naked and unashamed. And they could hear God's footsteps in the garden. We can't even recognize God's voice, and they could recognize his steps. And the garden was not empty. It was filled with animals. So there was all kinds of sounds in that garden, but they could hear God's voice and knew him. That level of intimacy is pretty extraordinary. I even wonder if our mythology of like Atlantis, of Aquaman and Submariner, is that God said, take authority over the birds in the air, the fish in the sea, and the animals that walk on the ground. We're only capable of taking authority over the ones on the ground. Why would God give us authority of the fish in the sea if we couldn't breathe underwater and have a domain there? Why would God give us authority over the birds in the air if we couldn't actually just leave the gravitational pull of the earth and fly? I think the stories like Superman and all those, they're actually mythologies that are connected with an ancient memory of what it means to be human. So I've just talked about lots of things that I think about.
I think that's all really, really beautiful, in many ways mystical. Maybe this is going to box you in too much, but like, where would you land in today with something like total depravity, of the idea that man is born a sinner? Like, does that not register with you? Do you find that to be like, oh, I don't believe that. I think that we are born inherently good and we forgot? Or do you have any kind of a dogmatic claim?
I think John Calvin established that view that human beings are born depraved, or at least popularized it in the evangelical world. And I think functionally, I believe at our core, we're all created in the image of God. I think we're all broken. I think it's different than being depraved.
You don't think that's the semantics?
I don't, because I don't think that a child is born evil. When you hold your baby in your hand when they're born, that you look at them and go, how odd that something so beautiful could be so evil. You did not. You intrinsically believed in the beauty and innocence of who they are. And then you spent your life parenting, trying to protect that innocence, didn't you? Because you knew there's something inherently beautiful and good in them. And then as they developed a will, you thought, a demon has possessed my child. And what happened to them? And I think it's in the willfulness of humans where we begin to see the brokenness of our humanity, where we begin to make choices that violate the good, almost sometimes naturally, toward the other. And whatever the rules are, we just feel the need to violate them. And to break them. And so I'm always like torn. And I'm just going to be really honest. You know,
I think,
like, I believe that total depravity should be understood in terms of there's nothing we can do to save ourselves. That only Jesus saves us. And we're desperately needy of that redemption. I don't think the whole idea of total depravity and I was told this, that, oh, without Jesus, you can't love. Without Jesus, you can't do anything good. Without Jesus, you can't really be compassionate. Because if you're totally depraved, it means you cannot have one expression of good. And I actually don't believe any healthy human being believes that. I think you have to be taught that about humanity. When I did not know Jesus, I wanted to do good and felt frustrated that I couldn't always do good. When I didn't know Jesus, I actually had empathy for the poor, and I cared about people who were hurting, and I dreamed of ending hunger and poverty and making the world a better place, all before I came to know Jesus. Then I come to know Jesus, and they tell me, no, before you came to know Jesus, you couldn't have had one good thought or intention in your life. You go, out of your mind? Do you really believe that not a mother in the world loves their child because they haven't met Jesus? Not a father in the world wants to protect and care for their kid because they don't know Jesus? This whole idea of total depravity is not only, I think, unbiblical, it's actually immoral to actually hold that view of humanity. And by the way, psychologically, what's really interesting is people who lie believe that everyone is a liar. People who steal believe everyone steals. There's an interesting psychological dynamic that people who project on the rest of the world certain attributes, those are actually their attributes, which is why in the world you find what you are, not what you're looking for. And when you look for good in people, you find it. I remember many, many times actually helping people come to know Jesus because I would sit down with them and not just talk to them about what they did wrong. I go, have you ever had a moment in your life where you did something really good? Something that was like noble, something where you just were selfless. And when people go, yeah, I had a moment like that, and let them tell me, why didn't you do that every moment? I just found it unsustainable, to do good. I go, what would you do if I could help you get to the source of all the good, of everything that is a pure expression of love? Because that one taste of it is who you're supposed to be. And I actually think inside of every human being, there is like a soul memory of who we were supposed to be, and it's called our conscience. How could we have a conscience if we didn't know we were supposed to be more? Does that make sense?
It really makes sense. I just wonder at times if this is like going back to some things we were chatting about earlier, that the intention and the motivation of John Calvin to Erwin McManus, I don't know if I think that it's a whole lot different. I wonder at times if it comes down to language and emphasis of something, whereas I think that John Calvin is trying to create a system of theology and belief, and he's trying to package it in phrases that have now been shared at high levels that sometimes people, once again, are grabbing the handle of it, but not actually considering the bag of it. Whereas you would say that we're broken. I, as a father, I look at my child, and of course I go, they're the most beautiful thing in the world. I don't know if that means my child is beautiful or it says that the father's love has the capacity to look beyond their flaws and their weaknesses.
Either way, then it's your love and that you're capable
Certainly.
of that.
I just wonder if it's, for instance, what I would say about a child, and because we're using this language, total depravity, I don't know how we're on this is fun though for me, is that I think that humanity is born broken. I think that I want to, when I study the scriptures, I can go a beautiful way of getting there and I can take my time. But if I only have right now, I would say that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And without him, there isn't a way to the Father. That is this exclusive, specific statement that unless, Jesus with Nicodemus, unless you're born again, Nicodemus, the idea that there has to be a rebirth of the Spirit of God. I think that when they say they're totally depraved, I don't know who's given all that extra language that you've never done anything good of those things. I think they're saying if you never get to Jesus, none of it will matter. It's like, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul? I'm more just trying to land that I don't think that I think you would disagree with me still, but even as I hear you teach, I feel like I hear your heart and your spirit, and I think that there'll be people that listen to you right now and are going to say, he does not stand with an orthodox standpoint that humanity is born a sinner. And I didn't hear you say that.
I don't think humanity is born a sinner.
You don't.
So let me say that
Okay.
more clearly.
Okay, then.
I mean, look at Jesus looking at the masses, and he says, "You're the light of the world and the salt of the earth." None of them had come to him yet. So if Jesus can look at humanity and say, "You're the light of the world and salt of the earth," but you're not calling him a heretic.
Well, they did.
Well, they did, but the ones who killed him.
Right? No, I know.
You want to be on that side? That's fine. That's fine.
So you're telling me you're a Pharisee?
Yeah. I think every human being is born broken and separated from God, and that
you think sin is an action, not first an identity.
Sin is an action. It's not an identity. But our brokenness moves us toward separation from God because we're born in that separation. And I think it's interesting, like the word sin actually, I think, means missing the mark.
Yep.
Right?
There's a few layers, but I think that's the most.
Yeah. And what's more important is not an argument of sin and righteousness. That's an odd conversation to me to have about a one-day-old child. It's about life and existence. That you're born into this world existing, and Jesus comes to give you life. And that you cannot have life without Jesus. And that somewhere along the way, you're going to have to choose between life and death, between life and existence. And it's I understand the language of it, but there's a lot wrapped into total depravity. And the language around total depravity isn't just that we need Jesus only. See, I 100% agree with you on that. I think Jesus is the only way to life. And for me, that's not even like a hard thing to know. I feel like I know that. I don't even just believe it. And I think the difference is that I think that there is still the image of God in every human being. And that every human being has the capacity to do good, just like he has the capacity to do evil. And I think, we have the capacity to serve or to be selfish. We have the capacity to love or to hate. We have the capacity to forgive or to be bitter. And just on a personal level, like I remember when I did not know Jesus and I was really trying to be a good human being. And if you look at all 10 commandments, I was trying to live out all 10 commandments without even knowing they existed. And I remember I had this thought to myself, how can I save the world when I can't just save myself? Like, I can't even be the person I want to be. And so I came to Jesus because I knew that no matter what my standard for me was, I couldn't achieve it. And I could feel it in my soul that something was missing, something was broken, something was empty. And then they said, if you give your life to Jesus, you'll go to heaven. I didn't care about heaven. I cared about the emptiness in my soul. I came to Jesus for life, to know forgiveness, to know that my life had significance and meaning. And so I think sometimes we underestimate how much human beings want to live. I don't think they just want to be forgiven.
Yep.
They want to be alive. This journalist came out to Mosaic years ago and heard me speak and was doing an article on churches. And she said, I went to all these like seeker churches, but the difference in yours is that you're really intense and you call people to an extremely high standard. And don't you think that hurts you with your audience? And I said, I think you underestimate humanity. I think that there's a hero inside of everyone waiting to be awakened. And that's who I'm calling out. And so there's a sense where, they talk about having a half-life. If you call people to be forgiven for their sins, you know what you get? A very reluctant follower. If you call people to live their most heroic life because God created them to do something so significant that it'll shape the course of human history, the half-life of that is a pretty committed follower of Jesus. And so I think I'm just calling people to the highest, level. And Rich, I don't know. I don't understand all the theological implications of all this stuff. I've spent my life studying this, Yeah. And I am probably a person very disturbed by John Calvin. I mean, what he did in Geneva, what he did by killing people and setting them on fire on stakes, and because they didn't agree theologically, I'm like, whatever Jesus was motivating him, it was not the Jesus I know. I think that we can actually become the Pharisees and the Sadducees so quickly by trying to determine whether other people are right with God or not. And ironically, he probably was like a person who was sincerely trying to make sense of life and of Jesus and of what the scriptures teach, which I think I am too, in the same way. I just look at how Jesus treated sinful people, and I want to follow that pattern, Yeah. And so I don't have a problem saying that we're all like sinners, and but it's much easier for me to say that I am.
Sure.
Because the one life experience I have is mine. So I know I'm a sinner. I know I am a mess. I know I'm a broken human being. And for everyone else, I want to say you're absolutely unconditionally loved. And your sin and your brokenness is just a reflection of your separation from God.
Amen.
What God is really motivated by is bringing you to himself.
Amen.
And I think that's like the message of Jesus.
When you look around at society today, American culture primarily is what I'm talking about, there's a whole lot taking place. I've only been on the planet for 40 years. You've been here longer. They've come for you a couple times, and they've celebrated you. They've criticized you. They probably, some people probably deified you a couple times, and some have probably tried to crucify you a couple times. Are you really hopeful looking at America, or is it concerning? It feels like just watching this latest election. My mom was at a prayer breakfast. It looked like some old Pentecostal prayer meeting. I'm like, this is happening in D.C. It just feels different to me. I want to be a person who's like paying attention to the signs of the time. Where do you land as you look at L.A., as you look at the places that you go? Do you have this incredible excitement, hope? Do you sense a warning that you want to share? And I'm really primarily talking about the church and believers.
Yeah, I'm always hopeful. Like, I'm an incredibly hopeful person because I don't think anything can stop what Jesus is doing in human history. Yeah. So I'm never worried about the political structures or systems. And I know people really do worry about that. And but I look and go, Christianity did really well under the Roman Empire, and the United States in its worst condition is probably better than the Roman Empire. And also
we've seen Gladiator 1 and 2.
That's right, and 2 was terrible. And
terrible, wow.
And Christianity is thriving in China, a communist country that basically killed all of its religious leaders in its revolution. Christianity actually is thriving in Africa with massive poverty and oppression. Christianity seems to do really well under persecution. So when I look at it and go, to me, it's a win-win. When our culture moves in a direction that really affirms our opportunity to have faith and reflects our values in different ways, I think that's a great win. I think it creates a better, healthier society. I mean, frankly, I think biblical principles make the best nations, just straight up. And but if it goes the other direction, we're just going to get better.
Yeah.
We're going to be stronger. We'll be a greater light. The darker it gets, the brighter we're going to be. So I don't think we have a lose in it. We have a win if the nation, even politically, governmentally, moves in a direction that creates a healthy nation and affirms families and affirms what I think are like really healthy understandings of what it means to be human. And because I would have never believed I can't say that. I did believe that. Dang it. I almost didn't tell the truth. I was in my 20s, and I believed there would be a day that we would be arguing about gender. I just didn't know it would happen so fast. It happened faster than I expected, but I didn't predict that in my 20s. And so if culture moves toward a healthier view of humanity, it's great. But if culture moves against Christianity, we're going to rise and be really powerful. Amen. And so I'm hopeful because we do not need the government to be on our side. We do not need culture to be on our side because the movement of Jesus is unstoppable. No empire, no economic system, no nation, no ideology. Nothing has ever proven strong enough to stop what Jesus started. So I'm on the winning team.
Let's go. I read the end of the book. We win.
Yeah. It's like, this has already been, this is the house. This is house money.
Amen. I receive it. Here's the cliche question that comes at the end. It's not cliche to me, but what's one area of your life right now, as we come to kind of the end of this, like that you're wanting to mature in, or that you would even say in your 60s you're immature in?
Wow. Well, there's some things I just want to die immature. No. No. I want to have a childlike imagination until I die.
Amen.
I'm really working on some new projects, and they take on a level of discipline and structure that is going to be very challenging for me this next year. And so at 66, I'm treating my life as if everything has been pregame, and now the game starts for me. Like everything has been prep, and these are the most important decades of my life. And I feel like I'm supposed to leave behind things that will help people for hundreds of years. And so I'm having to learn different kinds of disciplines in my life. And then some of them are interpersonal, like in my life. Like I'm learning to, it sounds crazy, but I'm a very accommodating person. I just don't like to tell people what to do. So I'm learning how to be more assertive. And this is new and challenging for me.
Better late than never.
But I also went through these psychological assessments, and just in the last month. At 66, I want to learn more about myself and know how to grow as a human being. And they told me that there was a disproportionate relationship between my talent and my confidence, that I actually don't see myself as very gifted or capable, that I have a very low sense of self. And it's true. All my life, I've struggled with a sense of value or talent or gifting or intelligence. I've always felt like I've lived at a deficit. And the great gift of that is driven me to work really hard and to try to compensate for what I don't have. But what didn't happen is I don't have a natural sense of self-esteem. I'm not the guy who says I'm awesome. I don't even know what that feels like. And then on these scales, I'm just like opposite. Like you would think from talent that I would have this incredible sense of self, but I actually have the opposite. And so I'm trying to learn to grow there, and which I don't guess I need to grow in it. I've lived with this all my life. But I realize that if I don't grow there, I can't help other people.
Yep.
And so I'm trying to navigate my way through that even at this stage of my life, so that other people who may have the same boundary in their life, that I can help them guide them. Because I don't think any learning is just for you. Yep. I don't think any growth is just for you. Whatever God is taking you through, it's really so that you can set other people free. So I'm still fighting for my freedom to become the full version of myself.
We call that a trail worker, someone who goes ahead, clears the trail so others can follow. And let me just say, there's been a lot of us for decades that have been following the trail that you've been blazing. We thank you for that. I appreciate your time today. Always love your thoughts. And I love when you give us a little bit of the unfiltered version of Erwin McManus.
I gave you a lot of unfiltered.
Yeah, we like it. We like it. We can always edit if we have to. We're not going to. His latest project is 7 Frequencies of Communication. Go find this, get this. He's got so many books out there, but this is his latest one. I think it's always fun to get the newest one because it's the thing that's fresh in his heart right now. But we love Erwin, all of our Mosaic family. Check them out if you're ever in LA, New York. They're launching in London. They're all over the place. Mexico City. You'll find them, whatever city you are in. Wherever there's a Carbone, there's a Mosaic. Hey, if today's podcast encouraged you in any which way, leave us a comment, and we will always see you right here on Mature Me. We'll see you next week.